Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Hi, I'm Maria. I'm 37, and my husband Alex is 38. We've been married for about 5 years now, but we've known each other our whole lives. We grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same schools, and our families were really close, so we spent a lot of time together. We started dating in college, but life took us in different directions after graduation. A few years later, we reconnected, and it honestly felt like fate. We didn't waste any time, and before we knew it, we were married with 2 kids, Richard, who's 15, and Nancy, who's 14. Alex is an amazing husband and father. He's always been supportive, loving, and patient, even when I didn't deserve it. Our kids absolutely adore him, especially Nancy. She's always been a daddy's girl, and their bond is something I've envied at times. Despite all our ups and downs, I really thought we were a happy family. But then, my past mistakes came back to haunt me in the worst way possible. Let me explain what I mean by that. A few years ago, not long after we had Richard, we went through a really rough patch. Alex's dad had passed away, and Alex had to step up as the new CEO of the company. It was a lot of pressure, and Alex was constantly busy trying to adjust to his new role. I, on the other hand, felt lonely and neglected. That's when I started spending more time with Butch, Alex's best friend. I was struggling with postpartum depression, and I just needed someone to talk to. Butch was there for me, and one night, things went too far. We ended up sleeping together, and stupidly, it happened a few more times after that. We didn't use protection, and we promised each other not to tell Alex. Butch didn't want to lose his friendship with Alex or his job at the company, and honestly, I didn't want to lose my husband either. A few months later, I found out I was pregnant, and I completely freaked out. I knew there was a chance the baby could be Butch's, but I didn't want that to be the case. I convinced myself that it couldn't be. So, I told Alex it was his, and he was overjoyed when I told him. It was such a dark time for me. The guilt weighed on me every single day, but I pushed it aside, telling myself that as long as Alex never found out, everything would be okay. I buried those memories deep and focused on being the best wife and mother I could be. When Nancy was born, Alex was thrilled. He was so happy to have a daughter, and Nancy brought so much joy to our family. Watching him with her, though, made my guilt feel even heavier. But I kept the secret, hoping it would never come out. I managed to keep it hidden for so long, mostly because Nancy looked just like me. She didn't look anything like Alex, but because she resembled me so much, no one ever suspected anything. Our friends and family would joke that Richard was a carbon copy of Alex, and Nancy was a carbon copy of me. It became this running joke at family gatherings, and every time it came up, I would laugh along, though it felt like a knife to my chest. When Nancy was born, I literally breathed a sigh of relief. Her features were so similar to mine that it almost felt like fate was giving me a second chance to keep my secret safe. Initially, I was relieved, but as she got older, her features still resembled mine so much. Alex never questioned it. He was just so happy to have a daughter. He would often comment on how lucky he was to have such beautiful children, saying each one was a perfect blend of the 2 of us. Of course, the guilt never went away, but I learned how to bury it deeper. I told myself it was just a mistake, a moment of weakness that didn't define me or my marriage. Butch and I never spoke about it again. We kept a careful distance to avoid any suspicion. As time passed, I threw myself into being the best wife and mother I could be, hoping that my love and devotion could somehow make up for my betrayal. Years went by, and the secret became just a part of my life. It was like this shadow that followed me around, never quite revealing itself. I would watch Alex with Nancy, playing with her, teaching her to ride a bike, helping her with homework, and my heart would ache. He was such an amazing father, and Nancy adored him. She would always run to him for comfort or to share her excitement. I was even more surprised when Nancy ran to me first after she found out. So, how did she find out? Well, it all started with something pretty innocent. Nancy wanted to do one of those ancestry DNA tests just to see if there were any interesting cultural backgrounds in our family, apart from just being white. She was curious about learning more about our family's history and heritage. At first, I didn't think much of it. It seemed like a fun, educational thing to do, and I didn't anticipate any harm coming from it. Looking back now, I should have realized something could go wrong, but at the time, I didn't handle it the way I should have. It all began because Richard did his DNA test first. He was excited about it and shared his results with us, which got Nancy interested. She thought it would be cool to see if she had any surprises in her background too. I should have been more cautious, but I never imagined that those tests could expose my deepest, darkest secret. When Nancy got her results, she came to me, thankfully, not to Alex. She was confused because her results were so different from Richard's. It didn't make sense to her, especially since they were supposed to be full siblings. She expected their genetic makeup to be somewhat similar, but the differences were enough to make her question things. She wanted an explanation, and in that moment, I panicked. Maybe I should have come up with some kind of plausible story, but instead, I stupidly blurted out the truth. I told Nancy that Alex wasn't her biological father. I briefly explained the affair with Butch and how she was conceived. I was overwhelmed with guilt and fear, and I made her promise not to tell anyone, especially not Alex. I thought if Nancy and I kept the secret between us, we could control the situation. Nancy, understandably, was shocked and confused. She didn't know how to process everything, and I could see how hurt she was. I tried to console her, to explain that Alex loved her so much and that nothing needed to change between them. But I could see she was struggling with the realization, and I hated myself for putting her in that position. Honestly, I still hate myself for that. I should have never told her. I thought we could keep the secret, but I underestimated how heavy the truth would be for Nancy and how it would affect her. Nancy started acting out, becoming more withdrawn and distant from Alex. I tried to reassure her, but I could see how much strain it was putting on her. The secret was too much for her to carry. I did everything I could to support her, and eventually, she seemed to come to terms with it. Or at least, that's what I thought. But then, she started to secretly mock Alex, seeing him as weak since he wasn't really her father. She thought that meant he couldn't tell her what to do anymore. It was heartbreaking to watch her change her attitude toward the man who had loved and raised her as his own. But still, I clung to the hope that our secret would remain safe. That illusion was shattered just a week ago when Nancy had a sleepover with her friends. One of her friends was struggling to accept the idea of having a stepdad, and in an attempt to reassure her, Nancy mockingly told her that having a stepdad was like having a dad with all the good stuff but none of the authority, since they weren't real parents. She went on to joke about Alex, saying that she never listened to him anymore ever since she found out he wasn't her real dad. What Nancy didn't know was that Alex was standing in the hallway, overhearing everything. His face went pale, like he had been punched in the gut. When he finally came back into the bedroom, the reality of it all really hit him. That the daughter he adored and raised wasn't biologically his. It was devastating. Alex just stood there for a while, then knocked on Nancy's door and told her that he had heard everything. Of course, Nancy was shocked and tried to laugh it off, saying it was just a joke, but I could tell it wasn't. Alex didn't say anything. He just turned around and walked away, leaving Nancy and her friends in stunned silence. Nancy was in tears when she came to me, begging for my help, but honestly, I didn't know how to fix it either. Later that night, I found Alex sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the wall. The silence between us was suffocating. I could feel the pain and betrayal in his eyes, and I think I knew then that our lives would never be the same. I tried to explain and apologize, but Alex couldn't even look at me. He felt completely betrayed, not just by me, but by Nancy too. The daughter he loved so much had mocked him behind his back, questioned his authority, and even the bond they shared. It was a double blow for him. Now everything is just a mess. I honestly expected Alex to kick us out, but surprisingly, he hasn't yet, which I guess is a bit of good news. Richard is confused and scared, not understanding what's happening or why his family is falling apart. Nancy, despite her tough exterior, is heartbroken and overwhelmed with guilt. I really thought things were going to be okay. Since Alex hadn't kicked us out right away, I thought he might be willing to work on things. But no, he just wanted to confirm that Richard was his. Alex did a DNA test, and once he got the results, he called us all for a family meeting. He said there was no need to exclude the kids because Nancy already knew, and Richard deserved to know the truth too. Then, Alex asked me straight up who Nancy's father was. At first, I was terrified to tell him, but he insisted on knowing. So, I finally told him the truth. It was his best friend, Butch. Alex looked like he'd been physically struck. The betrayal in his eyes was devastating. He then told me to explain everything to Richard. I turned to Richard, my voice trembling, and told him that I had cheated and lied, and that Nancy wasn't really his full sister. Richard was in shock at first, his eyes wide with disbelief. Then, he became furious. He yelled at me, calling me a liar and a betrayer, and stormed out of the room. I wanted to follow him, but Alex wouldn't let me, saying that Richard needed time to process everything. After that, Alex told me he was kicking Nancy and me out of the house. He said we had a few hours to pack, and that Richard would stay with him, because Richard was old enough to understand and needed stability. I couldn't argue, because I knew Richard wouldn't want to come with me, and he was better off staying with his dad. I kept begging Alex to reconsider, but he wouldn't listen. Nancy was crying the whole time, blaming herself for everything. She tried to beg Alex too, but he wouldn't even look at her. I had to call my dad to come pick us up. My parents were shocked by what I'd done and blamed me completely for everything. We've been at my parents' place for a day now, and I'm completely distraught. Richard won't answer my calls, and Alex won't either. I feel like my whole world is falling apart, and I don't know what to do. I know I've made awful mistakes, and I'm paying for them, but watching my family unravel is more than I can bear. Butch still doesn't know about any of this. I don't think Alex has confronted him or told his wife, because I haven't heard from Butch. Alex says he wants a divorce. He doesn't want custody of Nancy, and he says he's not paying child support for her. He even told me I'm lucky he's not suing me for paternity fraud. He insists on having his name removed from her birth certificate and doesn't want anything to do with her. This part is tearing me apart because, despite everything, Alex has been the only father Nancy has ever known. As far as I know, Alex hasn't told our friends yet. I probably would have heard something if he had. Right now, it feels like we're living in this strange limbo. Everything is falling apart, but the outside world has no idea. I'm dreading the moment when it all becomes public, and I have to face our friends and community. I also didn't mention in my first post, but I've been a stay-at-home mom ever since Richard was born. I haven't worked at all, which complicates things even more because now I have no job, no income, and nowhere to go except my parents' house. Nancy still blames herself for all of this. She keeps apologizing, saying if she hadn't done the DNA test or told her friends, none of this would have happened. It breaks my heart to see her like this, and I don't know how to comfort her because deep down, I know my actions are the cause of all this pain. I'm still trying to reach Richard, but he won't pick up the phone. He's hurt and angry, and I don't blame him. Alex still won't answer my calls, and I feel completely isolated and overwhelmed by the consequences of my actions. I know I've made horrible mistakes, and I'm paying the price for them. It feels like everyone is against me right now. My parents are blaming me entirely for what's happened, and they've even gone behind my back to talk to Nancy about the situation. I've been trying to keep things quiet and reassure Nancy that Alex still cares about her, but my parents have told her the truth, that Alex doesn't want anything to do with her and is trying to remove his name from her birth certificate. Nancy was completely crushed by this, and now she's even angrier at herself and at me. She says that if I hadn't cheated, she would still be Alex's daughter, and none of this would have happened. Seeing her in so much pain, knowing it's all because of my mistakes, is tearing me apart. I'm reaching out for any advice on how to handle things. And please, don't tell me to go to therapy, because I can't afford it. Alex emptied our joint accounts after he kicked us out, and right now, I'm fully dependent on my parents. They're letting us stay with them, but they aren't exactly being supportive. They keep reminding me of how badly I've messed up, and it's only making things harder. I've tried to explain to Nancy that Alex's actions aren't her fault, that he's reacting out of anger and hurt, but she's having a hard time accepting that. I guess I should have known that Alex wouldn't keep things quiet for long. He's finally told everyone, and I even had to turn off my phone because I was overwhelmed by the calls. He told everyone, including Butch's wife. She messaged me, furious. She cursed me out, called me a horrible person, shameless, a witch, and used so many other hurtful words. I can't blame her for being angry. After all, I betrayed her trust too. Butch, however, hasn't reached out to me at all. Then I started receiving messages from my friends. They were texting me, asking all sorts of things, wanting to know why I cheated. When I responded, the questions, accusations, and shock were too much to bear. I eventually had to turn off my phone because I knew they all supported Alex and that I'd probably be bashed if I even answered or replied to their texts. It feels like my entire world is falling apart, and I have no one to turn to. It's been a few weeks now, and I've started looking for a job because I realize now that there's no coming back. Alex isn't going to forgive me. He's not going to forget that I cheated, and he's not going to take Nancy and me back. It was hard to accept, but I've finally come to terms with it. Job hunting has been incredibly difficult. I don't have much experience, and I haven't worked in almost 15 years. My parents have advised me to start with low-paying jobs first since finding work after such a long gap is really challenging. They have a point, and right now, I'm desperate for anything. I've applied for several positions, but the responses have been discouraging. Still, I'm pushing forward because I know I need to rebuild my life, for Nancy and for myself. On a brighter note, Richard has finally started talking to me. He answers my calls now, and even came to visit me and Nancy. Nancy was overjoyed to see him and clung to him the whole time. Richard told me that while he hasn't fully forgiven me, he's starting to come to terms with what happened. He said that although he doesn't really see me as a sister anymore, he still considers Nancy family because she's the only sister he's ever known. Of course, I was disappointed by his words, but I know I have no right to expect anything better. I'm the one who messed everything up in the first place. I've also cut off communication with my friends, or rather, they've cut off communication with me. They've chosen to support Alex, so I've blocked them. I know I was wrong and I messed up, but I don't want people in my life who are going to be cruel and constantly remind me of my mistakes. So, that's where I am for now. I've been trying to make it up to Richard little by little. He can't visit regularly, but he does try to come when he can. Alex doesn't want us back, but at least he's allowing Richard to visit us. The only communication I've had with Alex has been through messages letting me know that I'll be served with divorce papers soon. It's been a really tough road, and I don't know what the future holds, but I'm taking it one day at a time. After 3 weeks, I was finally served with the divorce papers, and things have been tough. The divorce is officially underway. I signed the papers because I didn't want to cause Alex any more trouble. This is all my fault, and while I'm hurt and want to try and work things out, it's clear that Alex doesn't feel the same way, so I had no choice but to sign. Things with Nancy have been difficult as well. She reached out to Butch and his wife on Facebook, but they didn't respond to her. Instead, they messaged me, saying they want nothing to do with Nancy and are going to work things out themselves. I think it's cruel of them to reject her, but on a somewhat positive note, I heard Alex fired Butch, so now he's jobless. His wife can only support them for so long before she gets fed up and likely divorces him. I spoke with Nancy, and she's deeply hurt. She told me all she wanted was to know her real father since Alex no longer wants anything to do with her. It breaks my heart to see her suffering like this, and I feel guilty for causing it all. On a different note, I'm still job hunting. I have a few interviews lined up, so hopefully, I'll land something soon. I'm trying to ignore the hateful comments and DMs I keep receiving, but it's exhausting. I just wish people would stop reminding me of my mistakes. 2 months later. First, some good news. I found a job. It's low paying, but it's enough to get by for now. I'm planning to save up, gain some experience, and possibly start freelancing so I can move on to a better paying job in the future. My ultimate goal is to move out and have a place where Nancy and I can live on our own. The divorce has been finalized, and it was just as brutal as I expected. I didn't bother hiring a lawyer since we couldn't afford it, and I knew it would be a waste of time. In my state, cheating automatically disqualifies you from custody or alimony, which is a big deal here. So, I didn't receive any alimony or other support. The divorce process itself was fairly quick and straightforward, except for one thing. Legally, Nancy is still considered Alex's daughter. He's in the process of getting his name removed from her birth certificate, but it's a long process. Alex got custody of both Nancy and Richard, but as expected, he refused to take Nancy in. He told me right after the papers were signed that he wasn't taking Nancy with him, that she wasn't his daughter, and that he was going to have his name removed from her birth certificate. So, even though the court granted him custody of both kids, Nancy is with me and Richard is living with him. Richard visits me on weekends, and we have a decent relationship now, though I don't think he'll ever fully forget what I did. I was also supposed to pay child support, but since Alex earns much more than I do and my income is very small, I was allowed to pay a very minimal amount. Alex told me not to worry about it since he didn't need the money, so that's that. I'm just relieved that the divorce is finally over. Alex doesn't really communicate with me, except when it comes to Richard. He doesn't talk to Nancy either. She's tried reaching out to him and apologizing, but he's made it clear he doesn't want any contact with her. He's told her that it's not her fault and he doesn't blame her, but he doesn't want to have any kind of relationship with her. So, that's where things stand. Alex finally managed to get his name removed from Nancy's birth certificate, and that shattered her heart. For the past week, she's been crying nonstop, completely crushed by the realization that the man who had been a father to her for so long no longer wanted anything to do with her. It's been an emotional roller coaster, and no matter how much I tried to console her, nothing seemed to ease her pain. On a positive note, Butch, after much hesitation, finally stepped up and acknowledged Nancy as his daughter. It was a bittersweet moment. While it brought her some comfort, it was also the final straw for Butch's marriage. His wife, understandably, couldn't handle the situation anymore, and their relationship fell apart. Butch moved in with me, and despite everything, we are now planning to get married. It feels like a strange, complicated turn of events, but it's one that gives Nancy some semblance of hope, even though the damage has already been done. Alex, meanwhile, has started dating again. He's moved on, and though I can't say I'm surprised, it still stings to see him move on so easily while Nancy and I are left picking up the pieces. Richard, on the other hand, has completely cut off communication with both Nancy and me. It feels like the distance between us has become insurmountable. No amount of apologies or explanations can undo what I've done. I carry the weight of what I've broken every day. 2 families shattered because of my choices, and no matter how many times I try to make amends, the damage is irreversible. I see the hurt in Nancy's eyes, and I feel the emptiness in my heart. I'll live with this regret for the rest of my life, knowing that my actions tore apart the people I cared about most. There's no easy way to fix what's been done, and every day is a reminder of the pain I've caused. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.